Johnny took a deep breath and entered the chapel. For a moment, he did nothing but stare at the ground, taking deep breaths. He could feel Raphael's presence all around him. A warm feeling of love and compassion, but Johnny knew it for what it was. A lie. He had seen these creatures at their worst, cutting down demons, trampling and crushing any human that got in their way, flaming swords slaughtering the unholy and innocent alike. Johnny. The voice was a mere whisper, but it caught like a fishhook in Johnny's mind, dragging his eyes away from the marble floor and towards the waiting angel. Johnny tried to pull back, to resist, but he had already taken half a dozen steps towards the glowing figure that waited for him by the candlelit altar. Bracing, he made himself stop, hands clenched into tight fists by his side. Johnny, look at me. Once again, he was compelled, and though he tried to resist with all his might, he looked up into the face of the waiting angel, and knew he was lost. When he finally came to his senses, he was on his knees by the altar, Raphael standing before him with pitying eyes. Why must you always make things so difficult between us, Johnny? Johnny said nothing but staggered away, holding onto the altar as he tried to clear his head. Why do you always have to play such fucking games? Games? Raphael asked, a hint of humor in his voice. What fucking games do you speak of, Johnny? You know what games. The glamour magic, Johnny said, standing straighter. You tried to bewitch me. I did no such thing. I am what I am. I cannot help the effect I have on humans. You can't help it. Then why can I look upon you now and stand before you, my own man once again? Because I have, as you humans say, toned it down. You seem to be a little overwhelmed by my presence when you first entered. Where is His Holiness? He asked, trying not to look too closely at Raphael, who had now once again started to glow softly. I was told he wished to see me. Why won't you look at me? Why do you fear me so much? God has sent me to help you. I am the guardian of this place. Look at me, Johnny. There's no need to be afraid. Johnny did as he was bid. There was no compulsion this time. He looked because he wanted to. Raphael stood before him, naked and unashamed. He was perfect in every way. No, that was wrong. He was beyond perfect. He was beautiful and held an unearthly beauty that stole one's breath away. A dangerous beauty that made you want to fall on your knees before him, to offer your love, your life, your very soul. It was these emotions that so overwhelmed Johnny, yet he could not look away. Raphael's face was a sculptor's dream, far beyond anything Michelangelo could have ever imagined. The faces of the angels in his magnificent fresco paled in comparison to the real thing. Raphael stood a living monument to the glory of God. Raphael smiled as if reading some of Johnny's thoughts. Thank you, Johnny, he said. You are too kind. Is this what this is all about? You wanted me to tell you how pretty you are? God damn it. We could have saved someone if... But that was as far as he went. Raphael moved in a blur of speed, grabbing Johnny up around his neck and slamming him back down over the altar, sending candles and hot wax flying in every direction. Thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain. Do you hear me, Johnny? He said, shaking the helpless man back and forth. Before the Christ came to forgive man his sins, my brothers and I destroyed whole cities for such an affront to our God. These were harsh times, and now those times have come round again. So watch your blasphemous mouth around me, Johnny. You watch it very closely. Let me go, you son of a bitch! Johnny managed to gasp for a moment. The pressure increased, and Johnny was sure he was a dead man. But just as suddenly the hand was gone, and he crumpled to the floor, massaging his neck as he tried to learn how to breathe once again. You have heart. I will give you that, Raphael said, folding his wings. You'll need it where you're going. And where do you think I'm going? Johnny said, staggering to his feet. Asta Antica. For a start, we have lost contact with the colony there. No word for 4 days now. No supply shipments. Nothing. I sent a detachment of the Swiss Guard along the Road of Sorrow, a small army to look into it. They were all well armed, carrying radios. The last we heard from them, they were a mile out from Asta Antica. And then, just like that, radio silence. Nothing. Do they have a priest with them? 2, Raphael said, his wings stirring with agitation. Ostia is a blessed place. The bones of Santa Monica were buried there, making the city a holy place, inviolable to the demon hordes. Humans, perhaps, Johnny said. Raiders, scavengers. Doubtful. The city is well garrisoned, and the ancient walls have all been rebuilt and reinforced. The place has never been so secure, not since the Romans who built it left. Then what? I don't know, Johnny. That's why I'm sending you to find out. And what in hell's name do you think I can do? You sent an entire detachment of Swiss Guard out there, and they didn't return, and now you're sending me? Something has to be done, the angel said, pacing the room. Without the fish from the port city, the people here will all starve. We are already on the brink. Ostia Antica is the last lifeline we have left. Then why don't you go? I'm sure whatever's going on there, you're more than capable of taking care of. Again, the angel shook his head, sadly. If I leave this place, for even a second, the hordes of hell will descend upon this place and tear you all to pieces. No, I am sorry, Johnny. You shall go. One man can sneak into places a small army cannot. You will go and report back what you've seen. Now, go. He said in a voice that buked no argument. Go get some rest. I have a feeling you might need it. And try not to worry so much. Tomorrow, after all, is another day. Johnny spent the rest of the day gathering equipment. First, he went to the armory. He had weapons of his own, of course, but if he was going into Demon Land, he was going to need the extra firepower. From the armory, he took one SG-550 and 200 rounds of silver-tipped explosive ammo, plus a SIG P220 sidearm with 100 rounds of armor-piercing rounds. He also had his own trusty sword, acid-edged and silver-tipped, and blessed by the Pope himself, which he always carried sheathed across his back. From the armory, he went across to the SQMs, also known as boots and socks. There he picked up a waterproof sleeping bag and a few ration packs, not wanting to be over-encumbered for the long journey ahead. By the time he arrived back at the barracks and stowed his gear, the sun was already setting. Johnny sat by his window and smoked one of his rare cigarettes. The setting sun burned red across St. Peter's Square. A woman wept in despair. A baby cried out in hunger. Johnny Masterson crushed out his cigarette and fell into his bunk. He dreamed of children burning and wept in his sleep. He awoke early the next day and could not remember his dreams. The next morning, Johnny grabbed the light breakfast, checked his weapons, and secured his pack, and headed out. The morning was clear with blue skies as he walked through the English gardens towards the rear Vatican walls and the Road of Sorrow beyond. The road itself was nothing more than a B road that ran parallel to the larger A90. Later it turned into more than a dirt road that led through the lush Italian countryside before meeting the Tyrrhenian Sea at Asta Antica. Hundreds of Swiss guards and priests had died to secure this vital lifeline to the ocean. Johnny had not been there that day, but he heard the stories. Hordes of demons had come racing from the west, the setting sun at their backs as they plowed into the chanting priests. Crosses had burst into flames. Holy water had burned like acid, and the air stank like sulfur as the Swiss guard poured round after round of blessed silver into the writhing horde. At the heart of this chaos, 7 brave cardinals had carried the sacred bones of St. Augustine, burying them in the earth, scattering the blessed bones along the path, seeding it forever with the power of God. For 29 miles they prayed and died by the hundreds, until at last they reached the ancient port city of Asta Antica. Here they set up a small camp. Over time, the camp became a small fishing village with a church and garrison of its own. Then a small town, as the refugees were sent from Vatican City along the new blessed road to help rebuild and fish the surrounding waters. Johnny was suddenly dragged from his musings by the sight of 2 figures waiting for him in the shadows of the Vatican walls. As he drew closer, he immediately recognized his old friend and mentor, Father Matthew. Standing by his side, all decked out in a glowing white suit, was the Archangel Raphael. Cursing under his breath, Johnny gave a small wave and hurried across to where the 2 figures stood. "Johnny," Father Matthew said, smiling and sticking out his hand. Johnny shook hands with his old friend, happy to note that the old man's grip was like iron. "Johnny," the angel said, with an incline of his head, a small smile playing across his perfectly formed lips. "Are you ready for your big adventure?" "Sure," Johnny smiled back. "Fucking peachy keen." Father Matthew chuckled, but the angel said nothing, his blue eyes inscrutable. "I have something for you," the angel said, holding out his hand. "Give me your sword." For a moment, Johnny just looked at the angel before slowly drawing his sword and reluctantly handing it over. Raphael took the sword, balancing it in his hand as if it weighed nothing. Then with a grimace, he reached over his shoulder and plucked a single pure white feather from his wings. Slowly, almost reverently, he drew the feather down the blade of the sword. When he reached the handle, the steel split, enveloping the feather within before flowing back together, leaving the sword whole and intact. "What did you do?" Johnny asked, his eyes never leaving the blade. "Made it stronger, and its wielder along with it. There's nothing under heaven or in hell this sword cannot kill. I've given you a great power, Johnny. Use it wisely." Johnny said nothing, but took the sword back in awe, his eyes never leaving the blade. The sword felt different now, more suited in his hand. He swore he could almost feel the power buried within, the now flawless steel thumbing through the blade into his hand, traveling up his arm, making him feel like he could hack down trees or fell a small building with a single strike. The angel smiled knowingly before coughing politely, drawing Johnny's attention from the humming blade. "Best put it away for now. I'm sure you will have many opportunities to use it on the road ahead." Johnny did as he was bid, reluctantly sheathing the sword across his back. "So," Father Matthew said, coming forward, "I guess this is goodbye. For now. Stick to the road. Remember your training." With a small smile, he said, "Remember what I used to tell you when you were a boy in training, Johnny?" Johnny smiled and placed a warm hand on the old man's shoulder. "Believe in God," he said, "but keep your guns loaded. And your steel sharp." The old man laughed. "That's the way. God looks after his own." "And you," Johnny said, turning towards the waiting angel. "Any parting words of advice?" For a moment, the angel seemed to ponder. "Kill them all, Johnny," the angel finally said. "Kill them all." Johnny's first day on the road was of little consequence. He left Vatican City through the old Vatican Museum entrance and entered the Via Angelo Imo district. Like everywhere else in and around the Vatican, the district was nothing more than a burnt-out ruin. Long gone with the apartment buildings, hotels, and grocery stores that pandered to the once thriving community and tourist trade. Now all that was left was the Road of Sorrow, cutting through the district, winding through the blackened rubble and old moldering bones, some of which were human and others foul and misshapen. Johnny tried not to look too closely at these as he passed out of the ruined district and out into the lush greenery of the Italian countryside, pushing himself hard, the sweat running down his body, determined to make the Sanchez monastery before nightfall. As he walked, ignoring the gnawing hunger in his guts, he thought of the monastery and all he knew about it. In truth, there was not much to tell. The place had once been a small farm that ran alongside the SR-296, now known as the Road of Sorrow, right next to the small town of Dragona. The place had been blessed, like so many other buildings, close to the road and converted into a monastery of sorts with its own holy brothers, usually of the Frankian order. There were some few places like this along the Road of Sorrow, monasteries and small churches that had been converted from common buildings. Even a public toilet had been converted and blessed and now served as a small church. Johnny had stayed the night there once. The place had been small and uncomfortable and smelled vaguely of piss. He reached the monastery of Santa Velgine, just as the shadows were growing long in the west. He was tired, hot, hungry, and disheveled as he staggered into the farmyard, chickens squawking as he passed, heading towards a large barn and few outbuildings that now served as a monastery. Leaning heavily against the door, he pulled out his water bottle and took a long drink, pouring the rest of the cold water over his head, wiping his eyes, and running his fingers through his tangled hair, before rapping noisily on the wooden door. A few moments later, a small hole appeared in the door, and a pair of wary eyes studied Johnny, taking in his large frame and grimy look. When they finally noticed the small arsenal he carried strapped to his person, the eyes widened and the hole in the door was quickly slammed shut. Frightened murmurs and whispered voices could be heard quite clearly from behind the reinforced door. Johnny was just raising his fist to knock again when the hole in the door suddenly reopened, and Johnny stared down the rusty barrel of the world's oldest shotgun. What do you want here?" a quavering voice asked from behind the door. "What are you doing here?" "Take it easy," Johnny said, slowly raising his hands. "I've come from the Vatican. I'm on a mission from His Holiness. We've lost contact with Asta Antica. I've been sent here to see what the hell's going on." For a moment there was further murmuring. Then the barrel of the shotgun was withdrawn and the large wooden door pushed open. Johnny took a couple of steps back, his hands still raised, trying to look as harmless as possible. Behind the door was a congregation of men, seemingly of all ages, all tonsured and dressed in brown robes of their order. All except one, the oldest-looking soldier Johnny had ever seen, all dressed in camouflage, his white wispy hair peeked from under his cap, his liver-spotted hands. He held an old rusty-looking shotgun, pointing directly at Johnny's chest. "I come in peace," Johnny said, looking at the soldier. "How about you? Lower that gun, old-timer, we can talk." "We can talk like this just fine," the old man replied in a wavering voice. "Now how about you? Show us some proof you're from the Vatican before I put a hole in your belly." "Where the hell do you think I came from?" Johnny replied. "Think I'm here on a fucking holiday? Taking a walk through this beautiful Italian countryside." The old man came forward and thrust both barrels into Johnny's stomach and pulled back the hammers. "If you don't start talking sense, I will open you up right here where you stand." "Proof?" Johnny frowned. "What kind of proof?" At this, the old man looked perplexed. "I don't know what kind of proof." Suddenly, his face lit up. "Traveling papers, a letter from His Holiness with his holy seal upon it." Johnny was starting to get a little worried. He was no merchant who needed papers to travel. He had no documentation or any kind of proof of his mission. The old man was starting to get agitated, his hands beginning to shake, his breath coming faster, and Johnny realized, for all his bluster, the old man was scared. Scared men were dangerous. Whispering a prayer, Johnny shot out a hand, pushing the barrel of the gun to one side. As he quickly stepped in the opposite direction, the old man let out a squawk of surprise and fired both barrels harmlessly into the door jamb. Quickly, Johnny ripped the empty gun from his hand and threw it outside before upholstering his sidearm and firing it twice into the air. The surrounding monks all let out a cry of surprise and cowered down into themselves, but the old-timer just stood there, his stubby chin thrust aggressively forward, his hands balled into tight fists by his sides. "Pecker, one son of a bitch!" he growled at Johnny. "Even 5 years ago, you would have been picking your fucking guts up off the floor." "I don't doubt it," Johnny said, reholstering his gun. "I don't have any proof that I am from the Vatican. My name is Johnny Masterson. Like I said, I've been sent here by His Holiness to see what the hell is going on in Ostia Antica." "Masterson," the old man said. "That name sounds familiar. I guess you don't mean us any harm, or we'd all be dead by now." "No," Johnny replied. "All I want is a bed for the night and a warm meal." "Well, that's not up to me. That's up to Brother Luke. He's in charge here," the old man said, scooping up his empty shotgun and gesturing towards the cowering monks. Johnny followed his gaze as a tall, dark man, perhaps in his late 40s, maybe a little older, extradited himself from the pack. "I'm Brother Lane," he said wearily. "You're welcome to whatever we have. Please, Timothy," he said to the old soldier, "please close and bar the windows and doors. Nighttime is coming and we need to be tucked up safe and sound." "Yes, brother," Timothy said. "Perhaps she won't come tonight." Brother Luke shot the old man a warning look before gently taking Johnny by the arm. "Please, come with me, Mr. Masterson. The evening meal would be served soon. There is a wash area in the back of the building. You can wash away the road dust and rest." Johnny took the time to look around as he was led to the rear of the building. The monastery was no more than a converted barn. The entire bottom floor, one big open space with a small shrine taking up the rear wall. In one corner there was a kitchen area with an old wooden burner stove and a few shelves stocked with pots, pans, and various dried goods. The rest of the floor consisted of a large communal eating area, various scattered books, a few ratty-looking armchairs, and a few threadbare rugs covering the hardwood floors. A single ladder led up to the old hayloft, which had been converted to the brothers' communal sleeping area. The whole scene was one of organized chaos and camaraderie, a brotherhood completely at ease with one another, and yet Johnny sensed a sublime fear running beneath. It was there in the strange smiles, and the way the brothers' eyes constantly flickered to the overhead skylight and rough-cut windows, as if they lived in fear of the coming dark. Later, after the evening meal, as the brothers busied themselves clearing the table and preparing for the coming night, Johnny gently took Brother Luke to one side. "Hey, tell me," he said quietly, "what ails this place, brother?" The other man smiled sadly. "What ails the world, my son?" Johnny waved that away. "What is it you are so afraid of? And what did that ornery old son of a bitch mean when he said, 'Perhaps she won't come out tonight'? Who is she?" "A penance, perhaps," the tall monk shuddered. "Or a test. Maybe even a punishment for our impure thoughts. God knows," he said, gripping desperately at the wooden crucifix around his neck. "I've had so many since she first showed herself to us. God, the whiteness of her skin, the things she says, such loathsome promises. Already we have lost 2 of our brothers to this harlot of Satan." "You've lost 2 of your brothers?" "Yes. Brother Glenn and Brother Thomas, both lured from the safety of the road by her wanton flesh." "When did all this start?" 3 nights ago. I was woken by the sound of a woman's voice. It was like a velvet whisper, drawing me through the darkness like a fishhook on my brain, drawing me to her. Quickly I hurried down the ladder, careful not to wake my sleeping brothers, and stepped through the already open door and into the night, and that's when I saw Brother Glenn, or the back of him anyway, and the woman waited for him just off the side of the road. She was completely naked. Her white flesh glowed in the moonlight, and her hair was as black as the surrounding night where it cascaded over her shoulders. She saw me and she grinned. And that's when I started to scream. Her mouth was filled with fangs. Her eyes were silver in the moonlight where she glared at me. I flinched away from that smile and screamed my brother's name, but it was already too late. He had stepped from the blessed road and into her waiting embrace. She scooped him into her arms as if he was no more than a child, and turned and ran with him into the surrounding forest. Minutes later, we heard the screams. Such terrible screams. Brother Thomas implored us to go after the creature, that God would protect us, but we were weak in faith and afraid. Naming us for the cowards we were, he grabbed up his crucifix and headed out towards the screams. Soon his voice joined that of poor Brother Glenn. They both screamed long and loud, imploring us to help them, to end their pain. But we could not help them. Eventually the screaming stopped, and we locked ourselves away inside to the safety of the monastery. The second night, old Timothy and I kept watch. Just after sunset, she appeared again. She saw us watching her from a nearby window and began to display herself. She paraded herself before us. Brother Luke gasped, a small sweat breaking out on his brow. She touched herself, laying on her back in the dirt, promising us all sorts of dark delights if we would only come to her and touch her. Even after what I had seen the night before, I still wanted to go to her. The next thing I knew, I was at the door. Old Timothy screaming for help as he wrestled me back from the door, and the sound of gunshots and a high scream of pain and cheated rage. Timothy returned as the brothers pinned me down, looking sickly and ill. Smoking barrel of the gun by his side, he said how he had shot her, hit her in the shoulder, and how she had run off into the forest. We prayed that she wouldn't be back, but the next night she returned. I ordered all the windows closed, the doors locked. No watch was kept. We spent the night in prayer and song, trying to drown out the sound of her pleading cries and wanton promises. And now, you are here and the night draws on, and I'm so terribly afraid that she'll return. Johnny went silent for a moment, as he soaked in all he had been told. From what direction did the woman come? From the west, Brother Luke replied. Is there anything in that direction that you know of? Johnny asked. Yes. There used to be a small village known as Agnello Didio, somewhere around that area, perhaps a mile or so away. Agnello Didio, Johnny mused. The Lamb of God. Just so, Brother Luke nodded in reply. Whether it's still standing after all this time, I don't know. We brothers never leave the safety of the road. I mean, what sane man would? Yeah, Johnny smiled. What sane man would? Later that night, he sat by a rough-cut window, a single candle burning beside him. He had instructed the brothers to go to bed, to wad cotton into their ears. Father Luke had started to protest at the thought of leaving Johnny alone, but Johnny would brook no argument and sent the concerned monk to his bed. Now he sat alone, deep in prayer, waiting for the creature to return. He didn't have to wait long. 1 minute the forest was empty, and the next, she was there, by the side of the road. At the sight of her, Johnny felt a pang of lust, but squashed it immediately. He'd been tempted by far greater creatures, whatever petty evil this creature represented. Standing, he stripped his weapon from his body. If he was right, they would do no good against this kind of creature, all except the sword across his back, that is. But he did not intend to get that close to the thing, especially at night. Pulling the bolt from the door, he withdrew a small rosary from his shirt pocket and hid it in the palm of his hand, wrapping the prayer beads around his fist before stepping outside into the balmy night air. At the sight of him, the creature smiled and ran its hand down its lush body, running its tongue along its red bow-shaped mouth. "Come to me," she said, reaching out towards him with her slender white arms. "Come to me. Love me. Let me kiss you all over. Love? Johnny laughed. What the fuck does your kind know of love, demon? The creature hissed like a scolded cat before smiling once again. Come to me, mortal. I shall show you wonders the like of which you have never known. I will make you feel like you've never felt. 1,000 ecstasies your body shall know before you die. Tempting offer. But you shove it up your ass, Johnny replied, unwinding the cross from his fist, which immediately burst into flames. The creature hissed, blinded by the burning cross. It fled, wailing into the darkness. Johnny nodded his head, knowingly, and stepped back inside. Confident the creature would not return that night, he climbed into his makeshift bed and was soon sound asleep. The next morning, Johnny woke early, grabbed a quick breakfast, avoiding the questions of the milling monks, before strapping on his gear and taking Brother Luke off to the side. I'm leaving now, he told the startled brother. I'll track this creature and try to kill it. Succeed or fail, I won't be coming back this way anytime soon. If the creature returns, you'll know I failed. What is it? The monk asked, wringing his hands together. What happened last night? We all heard that terrible scream. We had hoped that you had destroyed the creature. No, Johnny said, adjusting his gear. I managed to drive it away. As for what it is, that's not easy. It's a vampire, or a demon masquerading as one. It all boils down to the same thing. Last night, it fled west. Perhaps to the village you mentioned. Angelo de Dio? I'll go there and see what I can find, but I have other business in Asta Antica. Urgent business. I'll do what I can, you understand? Yes, Brother Luke replied, grasping Johnny's hand, and we thank you for it. Our prayers and blessings will go with you. And for that you have my thanks, Johnny said, heading towards the road. Go with God, brother. You too, the monk said, as he watched the big man leave the safety of the road and enter the forest. For a brief moment, he considered running after him, begging him to return to the safety of the monastery, but he couldn't do it. The world beyond the road was for far braver men than he. Sighing, he made the sign of the cross in the direction that Johnny had traveled. Then, with a nervous glance up at the sky, he quickly scurried back inside to his waiting brothers. The village of Agnello de Dio was remarkably preserved. There was no sign of burning or fighting in this quiet corner of the world. Nature had once again taken a stranglehold, free of the constraints of man's interference. Many of the houses had fallen into disrepair, roofs had collapsed, windows had broken, and leaves had blown through open doorways where vines and moss crawled up peeling plaster walls. What few cars remained had long ago started to rust, their paint flaking, their tires flat and shredded. Tall grass grew between the stones of the cobblestone street, dotted here and there with wild meadow flowers, and yet Johnny noticed as he walked up the high street with its few abandoned shops and creaking signs. No birds sang in this place, nor was there the drone of insects or the sound of scurrying creatures in the long grass. There was only the breeze and the baking sun, but still Johnny felt cold. There was a sense of foreboding in this place, and a sense of evil. Nothing you could physically feel or reach out and touch, but a kind of shroud that weighed heavily against your soul, drying out your mouth, making the skin on the back of your neck feel tight and uncomfortable. Johnny knew that an evil haunted this place. But was it the same evil that haunted the monastery last night? He didn't know, yet he was determined to find out. Shouldering off his pack into an empty doorway, he drew a small vial of holy water from his shirt pocket and knelt, facing the sun. His eyes tight shut and his head bowed. Whatever prayer he muttered was between him and God, but when he stood, the small vial that had been clasped between his hands now started to ever so faintly glow. Johnny smiled and made the sign of the cross before heading back to the street. At first he walked down the street heading east towards a collection of small buildings, but the glow immediately began to fade. Slowly, he turned around until the glow reappeared, burning more brightly as he faced north. Johnny hurried in that direction, passing through street after street, until he came to a narrow dirt track hemmed with a small, gaily painted wall, on which unicorns and other cartoon characters danced merrily through a bright, enchanted forest. The sign on the gate simply read, Scuola del Villaggio, or Village School. As Johnny stepped over the threshold, the vial of holy water in his hand began to burn so brightly that it was like holding a miniature supernova in the palm of his hand, and Johnny knew that he had found the right place. Wincing against the brightness, he closed his fist and placed the vial of holy water in his jean pocket. Even through the heavy material, he could still see a faint glow and feel its burning warmth against his leg. Looking around, he quickly hurried up the path until he came upon a small, squat building with peeling white walls and red-tiled roof. A set of swings and a rusty-looking slide made up a playground of sorts, surrounded by an overgrown lawn and fruit trees. It was to one of these trees Johnny hurried over, and drawing a large hunting knife from the sheath at his side, began to hack and saw at the thick, stunted branches. When he had finished, he had a blunt stake about 15 inches long, which he quickly sharpened into a razor's point before heading up towards the school. He tried the front door, which he expected to be locked, but it wasn't, and gave away grudgingly with a protesting shriek. He saw the body just as the smell hit him. It was a smell of blood and decay, a smell Johnny knew very well, but never really got used to. With a curse, he stuck the stake in his belt and covered his nose and mouth with his hand before approaching the bloody mess on the floor. The man had clearly been a monk. Johnny could tell from the torn and shredded robe that lay all around the eviscerated corpse at his feet, and he wondered if this was Brother Glenn or Brother Thomas. He supposed it didn't matter. Either way, whoever the man was, he had died hard, disemboweled, and neutered. His bloody bowels lay like bloated sausages by the side of his screaming face, which the lower jaw had been wrenched from, leaving a bloody maw. Even the eyes were missing. Johnny gave a small prayer that the man had been long dead before such atrocities had been committed. Stepping over the body, he made the sign of the cross and continued on deeper into the school. Knowing exactly what he was looking for and finding it just off to his left and between two abandoned classrooms, a narrow door built into the wall. Johnny reached out smiling and just as he expected, found the door to be unlocked. Stepping back, he raised a booted foot and kicked at the door. The door crumbled in its frame, but held fast. Cursing, Johnny kicked it again, and again until it tore from its hinges and hung askew, revealing a narrow passageway leading down into the darkness. Johnny took the blazing vial out of his pocket, and wincing held it out at arm's length, lighting the way as he descended. His skin was starting to crawl now, the skin on his balls feeling tight and uncomfortable. Still, he descended until he turned a sharp corner at the bottom of the stairs, which opened up into a large storage room. The creature was there, laying upon two trestle-like tables, with no attempt at subterfuge whatsoever, confident in her hiding place and her kind's dominance in this new world. Johnny made no attempt at stealth, knowing the creature was trapped until the sun set below the horizon. "Can you hear me?" he said, slapping the creature hard across the face. Immediately, her crimson eyes flew open and stared at Johnny with cheated hate. "That's right, bitch. Remember me? We had a nice little chat that night." "I've come," he said, showing her the sharpened stake, "to show you some delights of my own." The creature's lips drew back to show teeth that would have shamed a wolf, yet still it could not move, only glare and hiss at him as he straddled her prone form, taking hold of the sharpened stake in a two-handed death grip. He raised it above his head. "Requiem aeternam, dona est Domine et lux perpetua loatias," he intoned before bringing the stake down into a whistling arc. puncturing through the flesh and bone and into the black heart beneath. The creature let out a shriek of agony, its jaw opening impossibly wide, spilling blood down its face as its back arched, its hands scrambling at Johnny's arms. But Johnny knocked the flailing hands away and jumped free. But the creature would not die. Cursing, Johnny jumped forward and shoved the glowing vial into the creature's bloody mouth, slamming her jaw shut, shattering the glass, releasing the holy water within. Suddenly, her entire thrashing head started to glow. Steam and smoke billowed from her mouth, and her eyes boiled from her head. She let out a last ear-piercing shriek, and at last lay still. Johnny did not hesitate, but drew the sword from across his back and took the creature's head in one fell swoop. Taking it by the hair, he carried it back through the school and tossed it outside into the glaring sunlight. Instantly, the skull started to steam and collapse in upon itself. Seconds later, it was no more than dust on the wind. Johnny spent the night in the abandoned village. He dragged the poor, defiled monk's body from the school and buried it in a shallow grave before fashioning a crude cross from a couple of old dried branches and tattered pieces of rope. Exhausted, he stumbled into a nearby house and ate a cold ration pack of chicken stew, covered himself in a couple of moth-eaten blankets, and fell into a dreamless sleep. He awoke late the next morning to birds singing and sat there for some time, a small smile playing across his rugged features as he listened. After a quick wash at the village pump, he repacked his gear and made his way back to the road before consulting his map. By his reckoning, he was over 15 miles from Asta Antica. The day was hot, and he would need rest, but he reckoned that he could make the settlement just before nightfall, if he didn't stop too often along the way. Shouldering his pack, he started walking back through the forest. He emerged about a mile along the road from the monastery and could just make it out in the distance. Silently, he wished the monks well. And then he turned, and he was on his way. Johnny arrived at Asta Antica with the setting sun. He had pushed himself hard, but the battle the day before had taken more out of him than he thought. "You're getting old," he muttered to himself. Just as he crested the final hill, he got his first look into the valley below, where the old Roman settlement of Asta Antica had once stood before becoming home to mankind once again, after nearly 2,000 years. The place looked utterly deserted. No evening campfires burned, no people milled or moved about their business. The place was dead, silent. And Johnny Masterson had a feeling something had gone terribly wrong. Slowly he started down the hill, the setting sun at his back. He had already unstrung his rifle, loaded a magazine, and cocked the weapon ready for any signs of trouble, but there was nothing. He continued on, completely unhindered, towards the open gate. Suddenly something shot out of the shadows. It was a small, black dog. It was screaming an almost human scream as it shot past him, leaving a trail of blood behind it. Hot on its heels stumbled a little girl. She was dressed in filthy rags, her hair matted and the lower half of her face covered in blood. Johnny guessed her age to be around 4, maybe 5. He called out to her, but she took no notice, just turned and ran back inside the shadowy settlement. With a curse, Johnny slung his rifle, drew his sidearm, and ran after her. But by the time he made it inside, she was already gone. He called out again, his voice defiling the silence. But there was nothing. Only the sighing of the wind and the sea breeze and the lonely cry of a circling gull overhead. Johnny's frustration was mounting now. He called out again and again, rushing down crumbling streets, throwing open the flaps of makeshift tents, kicking open rusty tin doors of leaning shacks, but still, nothing. Asta Antica was home to over 100 families, fishermen, sailors. And yet there was no one to be found. Johnny carried on walking past rearing columns and statues of broken gods. He even stuck his head into what had once been known as the Baths of Neptune, now used as a large storage house to salt and dry fish. But the storerooms were empty. Johnny carried on along, checking every storeroom, but there were no stores anywhere to be found. Ostia almost single-handedly provided the refugees back at the Vatican with their daily ration of food. Without it, thousands would now starve. Johnny had to go back and report to His Holiness. Mother of God, they had to be told quickly to ration whatever little food they had left in the city. If the refugees found out about this, there would be chaos. People would kill one another over a crumb of bread. He had to get back. Walk through the night to make his report. Quickly, he turned just as a shadow detached itself from a nearby wall. Even in the fading light, he could see that it was the same little girl as before. "Come," she giggled. "We have something to show you." And just like that, she was gone. Johnny chased after her through the ruined street, but she always stayed one step ahead, a fleeting shadow drawing him onward until he rounded a corner and stopped dead. He was at the old Roman amphitheater. Everywhere there were burning torches, driving back the encroaching night. Johnny stumbled forward, his mouth working, but he could only manage a low groan as he took in the devastation about him. In the middle of the amphitheater where the old Roman stage would have been, there were hundreds, no, thousands, of bloody bones, all picked clean. Even the skulls had been cracked open, the contents scooped out and devoured. Up in the stone stand sat more bodies, massive, purple, and engorged, their flesh tight and bulging through their torn clothes. Some were naked from the waist down, their huge bellies bloated and crawling with blue veins. As Johnny drew closer, he could smell them, a vile mixture of stale vomit and shit. Lording above all this sat a thin, skeletal man, dressed head to foot in black and stained three-piece suit. As Johnny approached, he dropped the child's leg he had been eating and rose, spreading his arms in a gesture of welcome. Just then, a blur shot from the shadows and leapt off Johnny's back. Scrambling like a spider, it lunged forward and clamped its teeth down into the side of Johnny's neck. With a roar of pain, Johnny grabbed the creature and threw it to the floor. It was the filthy girl from the street who had led him here. She was crying now, begging for help, telling him she was hurt so bad. But Johnny knew it for the ruse it was, and with one fluid motion drew his sidearm and shot the girl right between the eyes. The creature at the top of the steps began to applaud wildly, laughing all the while. "Oh, Johnny," it sniggered, revealing bloody teeth. "They told me you were a cold one, but to gun out a child in cold blood, now that is impressive." "She was damned," Johnny growled. "Possessed." "Ah," the creature waved one talon-tipped finger. "Technically not true. She was bewitched. By me. Not possessed." "And who are you?" "Then again," Johnny said, taking aim, "I really don't give a fuck." The gun bucked in his hand as he fired round after round of blessed silver into the creature, who simply stood there, a knowing smile on his face. When the gun clicked empty, he carried on as if nothing happened. "I am Gluttony. I have other names, of course, but as you know, Johnny, names have power." "I know your real name," Johnny said, drawing the sword from across his back. "It's Beelzebub." "Again!" the demon clapped. "Not just a killer, but a scholar, too." Johnny ignored that. "What have you done here? And how is it you've come to stand on holy ground? The body of a saint is buried here. Was. It's surprising what you can get a small child to do for a few sweet treats, especially one who has never even tasted sugar before." "I had that little waif," he said, pointing at the crumbled figure of the little girl by Johnny's feet. "Gather up those old moldering bones and throw them into the sea one by one. took a little time, but we got there. And in the end, now, here I am. And for what I did to those good folks, I made them hungry. So hungry, Johnny. So hungry that at first they ate all the food they'd gathered. Some ate until their bellies burst. Then, when they'd eaten all the food, they ate all the stray cats and dogs. And when they'd eaten all of them, they turned to each other. Oh, Johnny, it was such a spectacle. Fitting it should end here in this amphitheater. The big finale. The death of the demon slayer, Johnny Masterson. I don't think so, Johnny said, raising his sword. The demon shook his head sadly. I'm afraid nothing can kill me. Especially not some sword blessed by a man in a tall hat. This sword is different, Johnny smiled. The demon faltered before that smile, then grew angry. Nice bluff, Masterson, but you're coming to hell. With me. Suddenly the creature began to charge. It grew taller. Black bat-like wings exploding from its back, and its skin began to take on strange, scaly looks. Johnny had seen this metamorphosis before and knew if the creature took on its true form, he was finished. With a cry, he charged forward, holding the sword out before him like a lance, but the creature shot into the air, looming above him. Its babbling laughter boomed around the abandoned city. I'm going to crush you like the flea you are, Masterson. You're nothing but a tick on the devil's ass, demon killer. A minor irritation I intend to scratch. Johnny spat into the dust. You talk a lot, demon. If you have some killing to do, best come on and do it then. The demon screeched in anger and threw itself at him, but Johnny saw it coming. Just in time, he managed to leap to the right. Still, the creature's great wings buffeted him, sending him crashing to a nearby wall. Johnny didn't bother to catch his breath, but ran through a nearby building, back into the narrow streets. A plan was forming in his mind, and he ran with all his might, his heart pounding, his head. He headed towards the nearby dock. The creature screamed overhead as it tracked him through the night. He was coming to a clearing now, the smell of sea salt perfuming the air. Praying, he dashed towards the docks. The demon, seeing its opportunity, swept down, closing in fast. Just before its hook claws made contact, Johnny dropped on his back, thrusting his gleaming sword upwards, slicing the creature's stomach as it sailed past. The demon let out a bellow of pain, folding up into itself as it crashed into the docks, tangling itself up in fishing nets and old rope. Johnny leapt to his feet and charged after it. It scrambled to its feet, blood pouring from its gaping stomach as it reverted back to its more man-like form, trying best to scramble away, a look of shock and disbelief on its face, but it was too late. Johnny was already there before. With a cry of triumph, he thrust the sword forward, with all of his might skewering the demon through the chest. The creature let out a scream of pain and grasped Johnny's hands, its eyes wide with shock and terror. I cannot die, it gasped. Everything dies, Johnny said, twisting the sword. One sinner, even said God himself, was dead. We all atone at the end. I cannot die, the creature said, falling to its knees. Johnny's sword slid from its body. Yeah, Johnny said, raising his sword. You already said that. With a massive swing, he sent the creature's head sailing into the darkness. Overhead, an indifferent moon sailed the night sky. The same moon that had seen Christ die on his cross, Lazarus rise from the dead, and Johnny Masterson kill a crowned prince of hell. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I want to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video or listening to tonight's episode of the podcast. I really appreciate it, and anytime you guys give me a subscribe or a follow or a like or a comment or literally just a watch, I can't thank you enough for it because you're the reason I keep making episodes and you guys are the reason that I love horror as much as I do. We're in the middle of summer, and I'm from Texas, which means that it's a great time for iced tea. And you know who makes iced tea? My wife. My wife sells tea. My wife sells tea on etsy.com/shop/ivorymonocletea. If you want to get the Mr. Creepypasta special, you can order a dark and stormy night and specifically request a dabbing sticker that you only get if you ask for it. And as always, I want to give a very special thanks to all of my patrons at patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta, because you guys are the reasons I get to keep my lights on in the house and get wonderful little treats for my cats and everything like that. And also the reason why we keep getting special custom series just for the channel. So a special thanks to Jacob Shaffer, Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Bryon, Arce, Ken Lando Higuchi, Bobby Karman, Tristain, Pelton, Chase Burnett, Bardo Hawk 764, TheBananaMafia 1, Melancholy Corpse, Hollow Zero, Ferb, Harley, Billy Morrow, Birch, Sashi Sazaku, Kayden the Spooky Boy, My Body Sounds Like Rice Krispies, Ashwood, Lord of the Weebs, Jay, Faye Lockett, Miss Exandra, Mr. Unsettling Spaghetti, Eurogore, Suji Campbell, Marco Takes Dabs 420, Stricken, Ozarine Fox, Robert White, Andres Garcia, Snails Brennan, Legit Quad Feed, James Bruce, Chris Lovins, Freddy Krueger, Tynan, Justin Johnson, Michael Scarborough, Infernal One, James Lowe, Lisa Cottrell, Caspian, Jordan Nels, Hades' Nephew, Tater Chip, Acid System, Prozac and Pancake Appreciation Society, Cryptic Nightmares, Someone You Love, Kiri the Sloth, Tommy Green, Sky Harbor, Caleb Dougal, Nina Smith, Nico Kayo, Rafael Rodriguez, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Polson, Trace Miles, Corey Kenshin, and Peaceful Buddha. That's right guys, at patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta, you could join this amazing list of people's names I mispronounce and the list of Patreons down there in the description. But of course, none of that is ever required. I just appreciate you guys subscribing and watching and honestly being here. So, to all of you, sweet dreams.